Sorry everybody, the iPad is so full of all these wonderful clubs that it wouldn't film any more of my story. But anyway, I'm back now. So, where did we get to? Ah, yes, Jodie. So, Jodie stood up and went all calm and said, "Do I look like a werewolf?" And we all said no, because her hair wasn't in her face anymore, and she seemed really calm now, even though her face was still a bit red and blotchy. So that's when we asked Jodie why she'd been hiding her face from us, and why her face was all red and blotchy, and also why she wasn't wearing her silver locket that she always wears. And that's when Jodie went really weird, and her face started trembling, and she started making a grunting sound. And then, before I knew what was happening, she was howling. And that's when we realised what was happening. Jodie was just crying. I mean, really crying. And I realised that I'd never seen Jodie cry before, ever. And also that she's really, really terrible at it. Zach and Maisie looked shocked. And then eventually I said, "Jodie, are you crying?" And Jodie said, "Yes." So we all stepped slowly forward towards Jodie and hugged her a bit and asked her what was wrong, and also if she was in any physical pain, because she sounded like a wounded beast. That's when Jodie told us everything. She said that it was her crying that I'd thought was howling on the first night, and that she tried to hide it from everyone by going to sleep in Zach's tent. So we patted Jodie's back and Maisie stroked her hair, and we told her that she was our best friend and that everything was going to be okay. But then Maisie said, "But what are you crying about, Jodie?" Jodie looked like she didn't want to tell us, but then she took a deep breath and said, "Because I'm homesick and I miss my mum, and I lost my locket and I've been trying to phone my mum to hear her voice, but every time I come down to use the phone, my mum doesn't answer, and I just want my mum." And I was shocked, because I had never seen Jodie get really homesick before, and I felt really, really bad for her. Jodie said that she'd been so homesick that morning that she'd packed up all her stuff and taken it with her to the phone box and tried to phone her mum to ask her to come and take her home. And Maisie said, "Why didn't you tell us about losing your locket and being homesick? We would have helped you find it." But Jodie said that she didn't want us to think that she was a big baby, because she was meant to be the survival expert, and survival experts aren't meant to get homesick, and that she was meant to be the brave one, and that she was embarrassed about being homesick. Then Jodie started sobbing again and saying that her special locket was gone for good, and that she'd already tried looking for it and it was nowhere to be found. So we all sat on the ground and hugged Jodie for ages, and Maisie gave her a tissue from her sleeve and some Maltesers that she had in her pocket. Then Zach asked Jodie why she had pretended Maisie's phone battery was dead when we were lost in the wilderness. And Jodie said that she hadn't, and that she must have switched the phone off by accident when she was trying to phone 999 because of the panic. When Jodie eventually calmed down, her face was all red and blotchy from crying still, and her hair was tangled all over her face, and she looked just like she had earlier when we'd seen her in the phone box. Jodie wiped her face and fixed her hair and said, "Okay, I'm okay." And then she stood up and said, "Right, we need to focus." So I wasn't sure exactly what Jodie wanted us to focus on until she said we still have the small problem of Miss Moon being a werewolf, and that's when we heard the screaming. The return of the missing sausages. When we got to camp, we were 100% prepared to come face to face with Miss Moon in wolf form. But we didn't. We came face to face with Miss Moon in human form, wearing her dressing gown. We all stood with our mouths wide open because Miss Moon looked terrified, and she was running around in circles squealing at the top of her lungs, and Miss Jones was trying to get her to stop, and we had no idea what was going on. Miss Moon stopped running and jumped up on one of the picnic benches, and that was when Zach said, "Does Miss Moon look a bit different to you?" So we all looked more closely, and that's when we saw that Miss Moon did look different. Her hair was all straight and shiny, and her legs weren't hairy at all, and her monobrow had completely disappeared. Then, all of a sudden, Miss Moon screamed, "There you are, the wild beasts! Look!" and she pointed a shaky finger at one of the caravans behind all of our tents. And that's when we saw 2 huge foxes pulling a string of sausages out of a caravan and into the woods. Then Miss Moon started screaming, "Those wild beasts have been terrorising me since I got here. They crawled all over my tent one night and I didn't get a wink of sleep, and now they've invaded my caravan and stolen all of my sausages." And that's when Mr. Jones's face went red and she shouted, "Excuse me, Miss Moon, what do you mean, your caravan?" Miss Moon's face went bright red too, and that's when Jodie shouted, "Get back, everyone! Miss Moon is about to transform into a werewolf!" We all ducked under one of the picnic tables and waited, but nothing happened. And then Miss Jones said, "What on earth is going on?" Miss Jones made us all come out from under the picnic table, and then she asked us why Jodie had called Miss Moon a werewolf, and why Maisie couldn't open her eyes, and why Gary Petrie was hiding inside a sleeping bag. So that's when we told Miss Jones about Miss Moon's super strength, and her meat obsession, and the glowing werewolf eyes, and that we'd seen when we did the ham plan. Miss Jones listened carefully, and she even made us repeat some bits, like the bits about Miss Moon being grumpy and having a monobrow. Miss Jones said that she was certain that Miss Moon wasn't a werewolf, but she agreed that Miss Moon had some explaining to do, and then she crossed her arms and stared at Miss Moon until Miss Moon eventually did a bit of a gulp thing and said, "Okay." And that's when Miss Moon told us that she wasn't a werewolf, and that werewolves didn't actually exist as far as she knew, and that was the reason she'd been so grumpy. And that the reason she'd been so grumpy was because she wasn't enjoying the outdoors very much, and that she hadn't had much protein. Zach asked Miss Moon about running into the woods and the smiling as she ran and her super strength. Miss Moon said that she went for a run every day and that she'd been smiling because exercise makes her feel better and release positive feelings, and also because when we saw her she'd just run into the village and had a bacon roll. I'm going to stop there for a second. Do you like doing exercise? Does it make you feel better? Maybe, once we finish the story, you could go and do something really fun. Maybe inside, maybe outside, that's a form of exercise. And then you could see whether you get those feel-good hormones running through your body, just like Miss Moon. Let me know which exercises you did. But then Jodie said that didn't explain the hairiness, and Miss Jones smiled a tiny bit, and Miss Moon gave her a look. Miss Moon's face went red again, and she said that she might have been struggling a bit with tent life, and that camping in the wild had taken its toll on her. And that even though she may look a bit more hairy than normal, it wasn't polite for us to point it out. And Miss Jones nodded in agreement, but she was still smirking a little bit, even though I could tell she was trying not to. That's when Miss Moon said that she'd been so miserable about not getting any sleep because of the wild beasts that were terrorising her, and that she had decided it would be best for everyone if she took herself into one of the luxury caravans so that she could be a bit more comfortable and get back to feeling like her usual self, because camping really wasn't her cup of tea. But then I said that that didn't explain her meat obsession and why she had stood in the rain for ages trying to get the barbecue to work, and why she had eaten 100 burgers and no buns, and the glowing werewolf eyes when we did the ham pan test, and the tree scratches, and the giant poo. Miss Moon said that the tree scratches might have been made by a rabbit, or maybe even a wild cat, and she had no idea who the giant poo belonged to, but that we shouldn't go near it again, and Miss Jones agreed. Then Miss Moon said that she must really like meat, and that she was on a full protein diet. Then Miss Moon said that she just really liked meat and that she was on a full protein diet. And then she got a bit cross about the ham roof thing, and that the foxes had surrounded her tent that night because of all the ham, and that it must have been the fox eyes that we saw. I felt a bit bad when Miss Moon told us that, because I knew Miss Moon must have been stuck in her tent all night listening to loads of foxes eat 200 slices of ham off her tent, and that must have been really scary. So I said sorry, and so did Zach and Jodie and Maisie, and Gary Petrie was sorry too, even though he wasn't really part of the ham plan. Then Miss Jones said, "Speaking of meat, were those missing sausages we saw the foxes run off with?" Miss Moon put her head down a bit and she didn't say anything, but we all knew that meant that they were, and that she had stolen the sausages for herself. That's when Miss Moon said, I'm so sorry for everything. I've not been very good on this trip, have I?" But nobody said anything, because it seemed like one of those questions that you're not meant to answer. Miss Moon said that she hated camping, and that the only reason she'd suggested it was because she'd heard that everyone in our class really wanted to go on a school trip, and she had been trying to make us happy. And that's when I realised that even though Miss Moon was a bit of a moan, she was actually a nice person for taking us on a trip, and obviously she wasn't a werewolf. Let's pause for a moment. Have you been like Miss Moon? Have you ever done something that maybe you didn't want to do, but you did it because you knew it made the other person happy? If you have, and you'd like to share it with me, then please do on the Facebook page. I'd really like to hear what you've been up to, because that's a very kind thing to do. Stop the bus. The next day, when we were all packing up, Maisie started crying because she said that she loved it here and that she didn't want to go, and we all burst out laughing because we hadn't expected her to say that after everything that we had been through. When it was time to get on the bus, Jodie ran so that she could secure the bus sofa for us, and I waited with Maisie so she could take one last look around her favourite place in the world. As the bus was pulling away, Maisie opened the little bus curtains and looked out, and then she said, "Goodbye campsite, goodbye barbecue bit, goodbye wooden benches, goodbye den in the woods, goodbye woods, goodbye Gary." I thought Maisie meant River Gary, but then Maisie screamed, "Stop! Stop!" And we all looked out the back window and saw that Gary Petrie was running after the bus. Miss Moon shouted, "Stop this bus!" to the driver, and he slammed the brakes on. Miss Moon and Miss Jones ran down the aisle and off the bus to get Gary, and even though we couldn't hear what they were saying to Gary, it looked like he was getting told off for not being on the bus. There's the gang looking out at Gary. Then Miss Moon gave Miss Jones a hug, and I knew that it was because they were both really happy that they hadn't accidentally left without one of their pupils, because they probably would have got sacked or sent to jail for that, so they were obviously mega relieved. Everyone clapped when Gary Petrie got on the bus, and he did loads of bows. Maisie said that Gary could sit with us on the bus sofa, and I asked him where he had been. I thought that Gary had probably been down at the River Gary sign, kissing it goodbye or trying to chop it down and take it home with him. But then Gary smiled and opened his hand in front of Jodie, and Jodie froze. I know for a fact that she thought it was going to be a bogey, also known as a crusty surprise, because Gary Petrie is usually like that. But it wasn't. It was Jodie's locket. Jodie looked totally shocked for ages and then said, Oh, thank you. How did you find it? Thank you. Wow, thank you." Then Gary started saying loads of random stuff about the Whispering River and his River King scents, and Maisie giggled loads. Eventually, Gary explained that he had gone hunting for it after breakfast and that he'd found it in the grass beside the River Gary sign. And that's when I remembered that Jodie had dropped and crawled under the sign when she found the red glove on the scavenger hunt. Maisie gave Gary a hug and yelled, "3 cheers for Gary the River!" And everyone on the bus gave 3 cheers. "River Gary! River Gary! River Gary!" And we all burst out laughing. And that's the end. So we have finished There's a Werewolf in My Tent. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope you've enjoyed our virtual book club, and hopefully before too long, fingers crossed, we'll all be able to be back together soon. Take care everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next. Bye bye.